The artist is a receptacle for emotions that come from all over the place, from the sky, from the earth, from a scrap of paper, from passing shape, from a spider's web, said Pablo Picasso. I'm an artist who's a receptacle for emotions that come from all over the place. The Canadian Fall, but also from dictatorship during my childhood, religious authorities, politically charged atmospheres, wars, and from passing from one culture to another. Some stories start from the beginning, some stories start from the middle or the end. My story starts from before the beginning. You see this man? He's running away from the men behind him. They want to arrest him. This man is my dad, and those men behind him are the secret agents of the dictator Hafiz al-Assad in Syria in the 70s. My dad was no thief or criminal. He was a man who stood up against oppression. He was a medical student. He was not the only one. Many were like him. Many ended up in prisons or just disappeared. Many fled the country as my dad did. He lived in Germany for a while, where I was born. My parents later decided to move to Saudi Arabia. Children are always great at adapting to new environments, and that was the case with me. I was able to adapt to the new accent while ignoring a lot of the content. I even got used to the dressing code. But the art was a major problem for me. The art lessons were boring. I had the skills and drew a lot at home, but there wasn't any real art education. We were prohibited from drawing living things, and the options were very limited. They always asked us either to draw a ball of fruits or a scene from the sea. They made an exception for fish as living things. Why? I didn't know. I kind of grew up tired with these two subjects, and this would happen in my head. Education in Saudi was characterized by the banking concept. You open an account and fill it, a one-way transaction. We had to memorize a lot, and we were never asked to express our own opinions. I loved drawing people and portraits. Sometimes I would be so proud of a drawing that I would bring it to school and show it secretly to my friends. Some would appreciate the art, and some would object to my audacity. They were already assimilated. They would say, God will ask you to blow a soul into this, and you wouldn't be able to do so, then he'll burn you in hell. Yes, these were the exact words. Did I get scared? No. Luckily, I had a very encouraging atmosphere at home and support from my parents. I didn't get any real artistic instructions, and instead tried to teach myself by observation. Those early years of my childhood instilled in me a sense of rebellion against censorship and opened my eyes to the power of art. In the Middle East, wars and conflicts are always happening. In 1991, the Second Gulf War erupted. Schools were closed for the whole year in Saudi. My parents decided that I and my two sisters shouldn't miss a school year and decided to send us back to Syria to live with my aunt, while the Gulf region was going through the upheaval. In Syria, religion didn't control your life, but ironically, secret agents and government thugs controlled everything. We had to wear military outfits for school. Big Brother was watching, always. His face met us everywhere, on the walls, on the covers of our notebooks. We had to memorize his speeches by heart. In this total darkness, a beam of light came through. One day, we were told that we will be having an art lesson. I was happy, but my happiness turned into a surprise or even shock. The teacher who came had actually something to teach about the art. She taught us perspective, the color wheel, and values. Her name was Mrs. Nahida Qat. She is the sister of a famous cartoonist and animator called Muwaffaq Qat. Until today, I remember her smiling face and voice. She made students exhibit their art at the end of the year in a little gallery, which was also a new concept for all of us. Last year, I heard that she passed away of cancer. She was only in her 50s. She lived her last days in Jordan after fleeing the war in Syria. This is a drawing she did when she was hiding in an underground shelter. The regime was bombing her village. I was able to contact her daughter recently. She sent me this letter written by one of her former students. Nahida was his teacher years after she had taught me. The letter speaks the true spirit of Mrs. Qat. When Mrs. Qat walked into our class, there was complete chaos. Nobody took art classes seriously. It was a time slot to catch up with homework or go in the playground and play soccer. She did something different, and instead of sitting behind a table and asking the whole class, "Draw something from nature," she stood, held a white chalk, and started drawing lines and circles on the blackboard, slowly turning into meaningful drawings. And she asked us to bring watercolors to our next class. Not all complied. All those who didn't comply mocked the ones who did. But shortly after, the non-compliers started to regret not joining when they saw the joy spreading from our drawings. Mrs. Qat made this art class into a joyful experience, something that we never experienced before. She explained how to hold a brush and mix colors. She explained things with much passion that we had to step up. Believe it or not, by the third class, all were present and completely equipped. Her class for us became a rendezvous anxiously awaited. It was a time for creativity, participation, passion, and competing. All this was possible through her amazing spirit. Dear precious Mrs. Qat, may you rest in peace. Your son and student, Muhammad Isaac. A couple of years later, my parents foresaw that the region was unstable and decided to immigrate to Canada. That was a difficult time for me as a teenager. I had to leave everything behind and adapt to a new environment. I wasn't a kid anymore, and adaptation wasn't that easy. Yet, Canadian culture and society are definitely among the most welcoming. I had to spend my first few years learning two languages. Mais oui, on est au Québec, on parle aussi le français. Between learning French and English and trying to catch up with math, history, and science in these new languages, art flew out of the window. When it was time to apply to university, my dreams and love for art got awakened again. I decided to apply to film animation upon attending a session at CEGEP about the program. It was not an easy journey. A lot of the students had a lot more training than me. Again, I had to catch up. In my final year, I met Professor Stefan Anastasio. He had a tremendous effect on me. He showed us films from Eastern Europe that criticized totalitarian regimes. During that time, a relative got arrested back in Syria for sending emails that criticized the government. Inspired by a Czech film entitled The Hand, as my graduation project, I made a film on prisoners of consciousness. Stefan understood where I was coming from. He grew up under the rule of dictator Ceausescu in Romania. Stefan's father had committed suicide because he had been constantly harassed by the dictator's secret agent. We connected. Such mutual understanding made the process of the making of the film easier. Stefan nominated me for an award, and I did win that award. After graduation, I worked while also taking photography classes. My teacher that I met during that time was Anthony Tioli. He was a Photoshop wizard and above all a great teacher. He had a unique way of explaining things. He would start from the simplest and move students to smoothly complex skills. He challenged us to produce artistic projects. He focused on conceptual art instead of the usual commercial art. I now have my own photography business. A wedding photography contract brings me money. It also captures the couple's love. While life was peaceful and people were falling in love and getting married in Canada, people in Syria tried to change their fate. But the dictatorship crushed them brutally. The Syrian humanitarian crisis is now the gravest in scope and scale since World War II. A growing number of children are now displaced and deprived of their basic needs and rights, including education. Their schools have been destroyed, their teachers killed or displaced. In response, activists, including artists, had to be creative in helping people to find educational alternatives. And I had the privilege of being a member of a non-profit organization called the Network of Child Protection. They run many amazing programs for children. One of them is a bi-weekly magazine to be used as a parallel educational tool at makeshift schools for children between ages 7 and 14. My contribution has been a series called Laila and the Alphabet of Spring, based on the 28-letter Arabic alphabet. where every story highlights a letter in the alphabet and introduces an important concept corresponding with a letter. The characters face different challenges and questions in their daily lives at school and home. They try to understand complex ideas like freedom, democracy, humanity, and justice. And the story goes on. That is my story. What is yours?